Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Outliers YouTube channel and our Get to Know series. I'm your host, DP Lyle, and I'm here with
Kathleen Antrim, the co-host of Partner in Crime.
and our guest today is dear longtime friend Lee Goldberg, who probably does not need much of an introduction because it seems like everybody on the planet knows him. Lee, welcome to the show.
Great to be here.
Always a pleasure. It's
You know
good to
what?
see you outside of a restaurant and a bar, which is where we
Yes, yes.
yeah,
Is that really good? I'm not sure that's good, but anyway.
Actually, I have a steak right here in front of me,
yeah,
Doug.
exactly. Our usual steak dinner. Yes,
I,
yes.
I, I can't be sitting with you. There isn't a steak between us. So I got mashed potatoes here, and you can start complaining about my cholesterol now if you like.
Exactly. Exactly.
Riveting.
Yeah.
So Lee, you have just an incredible career. How many books have you written? You're a New York Times #1 bestseller. I mean, you have written a ton of books, a lot of screenplays. You've even produced and directed. Talk to us a little bit about that.
I'm exhausted just hearing all that.
So glad reading it.
This is going to sound pretentious, but I don't know how many books I've written. I don't sit and count them, but I think it's a little over 40, somewhere in there.
Nice.
I've written a lot of books. I'm happiest when I'm writing 2 books a year on top of everything else that I'm doing. It typically takes me about 5 months to write a book if I'm doing it at my leisure. I've written books in 8 weeks. I've written books in 12 weeks. I've written books under extraordinary deadlines before, but I'm used to that from the television business, where you have to
Right.
write a script very quickly, and they don't care whether you're in the mood or if things are right. We need a script ready to shoot on Monday. Um, I love to write, whether it's for television or for books. I take the work as it comes. Right now, I am primarily a novelist. A few years ago, I was primarily a television writer. There are cycles to my career depending on the opportunities that arise. But I think now, in my dotage, I'm primarily a novelist. I still keep my hand in television. I co-created the series Mystery 101 that was recently canceled on all my
Oh, no, your life is over.
all that passive income gone. I'm going to start stripping again, but I, I do stay active in television to a degree.
Well, other than the speed of learning the speed of writing from the television world, were there things about that type of writing that helped you formulate novels and plot them and write them and tell the stories?
Television has fundamentally made me a better novelist. I think all novelists should learn about screenwriting, whether they intend to write scripts or not, because the lessons that screenwriting teaches are so important. Every scene has to reveal character and move the story forward. Every scene has to have conflict. And if you're doing a series, every scene must reiterate the franchise of the series, which I can explain in a moment. And if it doesn't do all those things, you cut it. And I start scenes in the middle because you don't want exposition. You want details of the past and of the case to come through organically through dialogue and action, not in exposition dumps. So the need to tell a story within 44 minutes that's moving forward all the time, that's exciting, that reveals character, requires you to be a lean, tight writer to get rid of anything that's extraneous, to hone the dialogue and to hone the characters, to make sure when a character enters a room, you create them almost immediately through what they say and do. It's invaluable. And there's also a pacing to television that I've internalized to a degree. It's almost like the beat of music or dance. And knowing that skill also helps in writing books. And there's another subtler thing, which maybe some serious novelists, which I am not, would argue with, which is we've all been inoculated or taught or we've all watched tens of thousands of hours of television. We have internalized the 3-act structure of movies, the 4-act structure of television. And whether we like it or not, we expect stories to deliver that. And if it doesn't, we feel as if the story's not moving and that we're missing something. And I believe a lot of people weaned on television and movies bring that expectation to books too. Even though books are a different kind of experience, I think they still expect that kind of narrative pacing, that propulsive drive. Whether you're writing a crime novel or a family drama, they still expect that those same peaks and valleys, those same cliffhangers, those same plot turns and those same stakes. And when I say stakes, that can be emotional. They don't have to be physical, or the world's going to blow up. Those kind of stakes. So the narrative demands and the production demands, ironically, of television, if by incorporating those into the way I write my books, really helps. In fact, I've gotten to the point now in my career where I have an idea for a book. I will do a quick outline for the book, and then I will write the book as a script. Not that my agent or anybody else will ever see, but just so I can get the story up on its feet. And then I can tell from the script, which I can write in a week or two, if the book is going to work, or if there are real problems, or if I see there are situations in the story that can't be resolved through dialogue and action. They're going to require internal monologues and exposition, and I rethink my story. So the script then becomes a very detailed outline that I use for writing the book. Doesn't mean I don't deviate from it, but at least I'm not making it up as I go along, and I am not finding the story as I go along. I already know that it works. And that allows me to write books faster because, in a sense, I'm novelizing my screenplay. So
do you write it in the screenplay format or more?
Yeah.
Okay.
I write it like as if I were writing an episode of a TV show.
Cool.
And because a screenplay is a different form of writing than a book, it is a blueprint with which other professionals bring their skills, the director, the actors, the DP, the location manager, the wardrobe people. It just lays down the story itself and the actions that take place within it. So you don't spend a lot of time describing stuff. You just put the essentials down, and I play out the scenes. And if I know there's stuff that has to be done in prose or I hate to say exposition, I type it in there. So okay, here's where I discuss forensics, or my character thinks back on what he saw in the previous scene. And I come back to that later. But I just let the dialogue and action drive the story. And I also get, while doing that screenplay version of the book, I get the unique rhythm and beat of my story, like a song. I determine what the rhythm and the beat is. And I also determine the point of view. Who am I going to see? Which character am I going to see these scenes from? Who's the primary point of view going to be? Is it going to be omniscient third person? Am I going to just see everything from one character's point of view? Or if I'm going to see multiple points of view, whose point of view will be in each scene? And I stick with that. The other thing I do, and I learned this from Janet Ivanovich when I co-authored books with her, is if I'm going to say something clever, if I have a brilliant metaphor or description, if the character can't say it or think it, I cut it. Because what I want to do is I want my writing to disappear. I don't want to call attention to my writing so people in the middle of reading a book go, oh, I'm reading a book. I want them to almost get caught in the middle of a virtual reality television show. They're reading their book and they forget they're reading. If I simply have a very clever description by the narrator or the omniscient author or whatever, it pulls you out. Oh, I'm reading a book. This is writing. So it's made it very tight. And scripts are like that, because when you write a screenplay, whatever's in the description of the scene is not on screen. That's for the director and other people to see. The audience never sees the clever stuff you write in the scene descriptions in a screenplay. That's to inform with the work that other people do. So I bring that same philosophy to my books now. The authorial voice exists in the first few paragraphs of the book, and then for the most part, disappears entirely.
Cool.
So when you're writing, do you see the scenes playing out in your mind? Is that how you write? How do you develop it?
Visual.
I get totally lost in it, just like the reader. I get totally absorbed in it, to the point where if my wife comes in to taps me on the shoulder because she's brought me keto cookies, I'll scream because I'm so caught up in the world I'm in. That doesn't mean I'm not looking at the craft of what I'm doing. I'm moving things around and rewriting, but it's almost like I'm watching a movie and stopping and starting. I don't know if either one of you has seen the movie American Fiction with I just forgot the actor's name. It's a terrific movie that just came out about a serious novelist who ends up writing a trashy book and it becomes a huge bestseller and he's stuck with it. But in writing it, the characters come alive in his office. He sees them behaving and they'll say things and do things and look back at him like, really, that's what you want me to say? And it's sort of what I feel too. But also when I get into a long running series of books, the characters almost seem like real people to me. When I start a new Eve Ronin novel, Eve Ronin's real. I mean, I'm glad to be
Oh
with
yeah.
her again. When I write television, of course, I see the actors playing the parts, and it is real to me. And it's so real that if when I was doing Diagnosis Murder, for instance, and I was having a problem with a scene, I might walk down to the set and sit in my character's office, walk the halls of the hospital, actually get into that fictional world to get myself mentally and emotionally into that fictional world. Which is one of
Almost
the
like an
great things
actor would
about
do.
television. I'm sorry?
Almost like an actor would do, quite frankly.
Yeah, but I mean, how cool is it to write something and then have that world built for you so you can go down and visit it whenever you want? It's
That is pretty cool.
Well, you mentioned Eve Ronin. Let's talk about her a little bit.
Yeah.
What can you tell us about her?
well, Eve Ronin is the youngest member of the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department Homicide Division in the history of the department. She's in her early 20s, and she got the job not out of talent or skill or merit, but political machinations. I won't go into all the details, but she has a job she does not deserve and has to prove herself, to her colleagues, and to the media every day. And now we're 6 books in. She has proven herself to a degree. She obviously has the skills, but she doesn't have the experience. She makes a lot of really bad mistakes, which is what I like about her. I'm
Yes.
so tired of these police procedurals where you have middle-aged men who are absolutely freaking brilliant and no one around them understands it. Plus, they're haunted by a dark secret. Their family was murdered by a serial killer. Or they have flashbacks from the Afghanistan, or they've got drug addictions and ex-wives. Eve Ronin has no baggage. Eve Ronin just has a family like the rest of us, normal family baggage. She doesn't have a dark secret. She's becoming the detective she will be. It's sort of like going back to the early days of Bosch or the early days of John Rebus or the early days of Morse before they were who they are. If I'm lucky enough to still be doing this series in 10 years, I'll get her to the place where she is that competent detective with the darkness in her past from all the previous cases. But now she's green. But the other thing that makes Eve Ronin different is one way she got this job was because of a viral video that she was able to leverage into getting a homicide department badge, a viral video that made her a celebrity. And the cases she solved so far and the corruption she's exposed in the sheriff's department keeps making her a celebrity. So now there's a TV series being made about her life. So not only does she have to live up to her own expectations and the expectations of others and the media expectations, but now the mythologized version of herself that's on TV every week. And that's what Dreamtown is about. It's her kind of going crazy because she's trying to solve the case. At the same time, her past is being recreated in the building where she works, on the streets where she works. It's freaking her out. And the case she's trying to solve is about the murder of a reality television star. So where does the reality begin and where does it end? And it's hard for her to keep a hold on reality herself. And
I love it.
That's Dreamtown. The book.
I love how it's very fresh. I mean, that's great. That's fantastic.
And
I want to go back a little bit.
The irony is that the book is currently being developed as a TV series. So and I'm not doing it. It's being done by I can't give you the details, but it's being done by a hugely successful television showrunner. So there's the very real possibility that when the next Eve Ronin book comes out, there could be a TV series called Ronin based on the books about a woman who has a career as a
TV series.
I love it.
So it'll be very meta.
Oh my gosh. Will that be freaking you out instead of her?
It will be, yes. How do I keep all these Eve Ronins straight?
Yeah.
Exactly, because they'll all be different.
Yeah,
they will all be different. Yes.
So Lee, I want to go back a little bit about before you were actually an official writer. I want to talk about your childhood, if we may. So when you were a kid growing up, do you think there was any part of your childhood that contributed to you becoming a writer. And I want to know if you had any imaginary friends.
Did anything in my past contribute to me becoming a TV writer? Hell yes. My father was a television anchorman. He was on the news every night at 6 and 11 p.m. As Doug knows, and many other people who've seen me being interviewed, he always talked like this. Even in casual conversation, my dad talked like he was on television with the same insincere smile on his face that I have right now. And when he laughed like this. So you never knew if my dad thought you were amusing or not. So seeing my dad on television made television part of my life from a very early age. I got to stop doing that voice. Television didn't seem out of reach for me because my dad was right there on the screen. TV was, it never occurred to me that it would be hard to break into TV, even though my dad was on the news side. Television was a warm part of our house. It was part of our family. It was part of our world. My mom was the Paris Hilton of her day. Your party didn't count if my mom wasn't there. And she was gorgeous. She was a model. She was named one of the 10 sexiest women in the Bay Area. So all my friends in high school wanted to hit on her, and she hit on them, which is kind of freaky. But my parents divorced when I was about 10 years old, and my mom was offered a job by the local newspaper saying, hey, you're going to these parties all the time. Why don't you write about them? So my mom started going to parties for a living. She became the society columnist in the Oakland Tribune, the Contra Costa Times, and I always, and to deal with the divorce and all the stress, I wrote stories all the time. I was constantly writing novels. I mean, I still have in boxes in my garage. I was always writing. But my mom made a very big contribution to my life as a writer. I didn't realize it at the time. My mom picked up some guy at a party, and they ended up in Santa Barbara. Got stuck there at a storm, and my mom couldn't make it back to the newspaper to file her column on time. So she called me and said, you've got to sneak into the newspaper. You've got to get my reporter's notebooks. You have to write my column. And you have to file it without anybody seeing you. So I went in, I wrote her column in her voice, filed it. Nobody noticed. And when she got back from her trip, I said, your job's not so hard. Anybody with a high school, not even high school, it was a grade school education. I was a freshman in high school at the time, could do your job. And she said, you're right. So she started planning vacations where she would leave me with all her reporter's notebooks, and I'd have to sneak into her office and file these stories. And I was so resentful of that. It's like, oh God, I should be getting her salary since I'm writing her column and in her voice. But she taught me how to write in someone else's voice without anybody noticing, which is an essential skill in television. Because when you're hired on a show, you're hired to write in the showrunner's voice. You're hired to tell stories the way he or she does. You're hired to craft stories the way he or she does, to mimic their way of doing dialogue. So it became an essential skill. And then I also became a journalist. That's before I became a fiction writer. I supported myself through school and paid my tuition and all that by reporting on the television and film industry for American Film, Playgirl, Newsweek, United Press International, the LA Times Syndicate, San Francisco Chronicle. And I was able to do a lot of it because I did them on the interviews on the phone, and they didn't realize I was 16, 17, 18 years old. Because I could talk in my father's television voice and sound a lot older than I actually was. And doing those articles became my graduate school education in the entertainment industry. Every interview was a classroom lesson. I learned something. I would seek out my favorite writers, my favorite producers, and ask them all the questions I wanted to know about the business of writing or production or television under the guise of these articles. And I learned an enormous amount that still helps me today.
That is remarkable. I mean, that in and of itself, you almost should write your own story. Why I could just see a YA with you having to sneak in and do your mother's columns.
Well, you right now have a bunch of books either out or coming out very quickly. Let's talk a little bit about Malibu Burning.
Malibu Burning came out in September of 2023. It is a big, over-the-top heist novel and a police procedural. It's about a con man thief who gets out of prison after working in the convict firefighting program and pulls off the the biggest wildfire in California history to pull off the biggest heist in California history, maybe in the nation's history. And it's a parallel storyline. It's also about the two mismatched arson investigators who are investigating this fire and begin to suspect there's more going on here than it appears. And then the two storylines collide in a way that I hope is unexpected and take the story in a whole new direction. It was meant as a standalone, but the book was so successful even before it came out. The pre-orders were so strong that by the time the book came out, I'd already written a sequel with the two arson investigators called Ashes Never Lie that comes out in September of 2024 and is a crossover with my Eve Ronin series.
Cool.
Then I had a book come out in November of 2023 called Calico, which is unlike anything I've ever written before. It's a genre mashup. It's a modern day police procedural set in Barstow in the Mojave Desert, and a period Western set in 1883, also in the Mojave Desert, that share the same dead body.
Oh, wow.
Flashes back and forth between the two time periods. And the two stories inform each other. And it's a book I've wanted to write for a long time, and the pandemic gave me the opportunity to do it because I happened to be between contracts at the time, and I wrote Calico. And then we've already discussed the book that just came out, which is Dreamtown, the latest Eve Ronin novel.
Yeah. Well, in Calico, when you were doing this time shift, did you basically have to outline each part of it, or look at each part of it separately, even though you knew that they were intertwining? But
it was the hardest book. It's funny because after Malibu Burning, which also has dual timelines, Malibu Burning starts, one timeline starts 8 years ago and intercuts with the timeline of today of the arson investigators investigating this fire. And as they're investigating, the bad guy timeline keeps coming forward until it's present day. I said, I'm never doing that again. Well, then I did Calico. Calico was the hardest book I've ever had to write because the stuff in 1883 required me to research everything. There wasn't a single thing my characters did that I didn't have to open up a book or call somebody to research. And I wanted to be historically accurate. And so that was really, really hard. I had to do so much reading. I had to call so many people. And what was nice about the pandemic, though, is I could go out there and research and not worry about encountering anybody because it's the middle of freaking nowhere.
Yeah, exactly.
But I ended up outlining in Calico and both timelines separately. I outlined the present day and I outlined the Western portion. And then I wrote both scripts separately.
Wow.
And then I had a different problem because remember I told you before about the beat?
Yeah.
The beat wasn't the same. And so then I had to figure out, what do I have to change in the writing? Because it's a feeling. It's not something what is it I have to change so the beat is pretty much the same? And it's funny. I'm not even sure how I did it. It's something you feel internally, like with music. I just kept rewriting the Western portion and the present day portion until I found it. And then I realized that having the Western portion be not quite the same beat, but to get there. And same thing with the present day. So the two beats sort of meshed. So they were dancing together by a certain point. So it was a duet. That took some work. And I'm not musical. I can't sing a song and I can't dance, but I can feel the beat of a story. And that was hard. And I can't even tell you how I did it. I mean, it probably has to do with the meter of the dialogue and probably how much description I have or don't have in the two timelines. The audiobook of Calico is narrated by two different people, and it really makes the story great to my view, because the two narrators, who are also narrators who've done a lot of my other work, it's the first time they've worked together, know my meter as well, and it was so interesting to see how they both played it in their narration. But I had once I decided it was okay, I wrote the scripts, now I got to combine them. I did a spreadsheet, multicolored spreadsheet, where I figured out when I would cut between the two timelines and where they intersected in story as well, so that I could keep that beat. And I ended up cutting a lot of stuff in both storylines. The book would have been a lot larger, could have been a lot larger, but I ended up doing some cutting and rearranging. And even after the book was done, my editor suggested some maybe don't go to the past right here, maybe wait one more chapter, or they also had some thoughts that I incorporated.
Sure.
So my question is, so when you had to rewrite to try to get the beats to match or at least, harmonize, did you ever figure out what it was that created the beat that you needed to alter?
Well, there were two different voices for one thing. There's two different points of view. There's a homicide detective trying to redeem herself who's stuck in freaking Barstow. And there's a stranger in a mining camp in the middle of the Mojave Desert who doesn't have any of the skills necessary to survive there, and he's trying to find his way. He's very much an outsider. And they're both outsiders. So finding the thematic link between the two characters and then playing that throughout both timelines helped me find the meter. And also, it had to do with the dialogue, I think. How they spoke, with the banter. Banter is probably too strong a word, but what the interplay was with other characters. So that interplay had the same sort of feel in both timelines, because the voices were different, so the perspectives were different, and there was a much more of a hurried pace in the procedural and a more of a slower pace in the Western, because by virtue of the environment this guy was in. So I think it was just adjusting the amount of text and how I was saying what I was saying. If I could say it in the past simpler, I did. I think the procedural was leaner because that's a format I'm used to writing. That came really easy to me, the police procedural part. The Western was living hell. And I think there were times where I found myself putting in too much detail, historical detail, and pulled that out, or put in more about the environment than I needed to. It was more of an editing thing than anything else.
Interesting.
In fact, it's more I think about it, it's like when I edit a TV show. The director gives me his director's cut, then I spend 2 days in an editing room cutting it, recutting it, so it feels like my show and the way I want to tell a story. The footage is all there, and it's how when I cut out of a master into coverage and how quickly out of the coverage I cut to other things that gives you the pacing in an edited episode. So there, again, my TV experience was helping me edit my book. It was like being in the editing room and looking at it on a screen.
Well, it begs the question, when you're writing a screenplay or a novel, or in the way you do it both, are you really cognizant of what first, second, third act, first turning points? Or do these things just become organically as you're telling the story?
They become organic, totally internalized. And it's funny because when I wrote my first diagnosis murder novel, I was doing the TV series. The TV series was over. I was hired to write a diagnosis murder novel. And the first one I wrote, friends of mine in the TV industry who read it called me up laughing, saying, "Lee, it's a book. You wrote a book that could be produced. You wrote it as if it was an episode of Diagnosis Murder. You don't have to do it. You're not limited by how many hours and days Dick Van Dyke is available. You're not limited by the budget anymore. You don't have to write a book that can be shot." But I had so internalized the way we wrote a Diagnosis Murder story, knowing in the back of my mind, I've only got Dick this many days a week. I can only go this far from where he actually lives. I only have Victoria Rowell. We're sharing her with Young and the Restless. So I was writing the book as if it could be produced. And I laughed. Like, God, this is how I tell Diagnosis Murder stories. I had to pull myself back and realize, no, it's a book. I have a lot more freedom. I don't have to worry about production schedules and budgets and locations. I can just do whatever I want. And
commercial breaks.
Right.
Yes.
You don't have to worry about that.
But I think even now, if you read my books, they read like feature films or TV shows, because that's the way I think of story, and I can't help myself.
They're very visual.
Commercial break, but each one of my chapters ends, I wouldn't say on a cliffhanger, but it ends with, you want to come back to see what happens next. I don't end with, he poured himself another cup of coffee. I have some sort of emotional or plot or action cliffhanger or conflict or sharp edge that we're leaving on that makes you want to come back for more. I mean, James Patterson has turned that into almost like Perils of Pauline. I don't go to that extreme, but I do want to give a reason for someone to come back. I don't want to have it such a blunt end to a chapter that they don't feel compelled to keep reading, even though it's 3 o'clock in the morning.
Wow. I can't even, as you were talking, and in fact, throughout this entire interview, excuse me, I kept thinking, these are the kinds of things you can't really teach someone. They're the kind of things that are just inherent from life experience, the way you see story. They're very internal.
I'd have to disagree with you. I was taught the 4-act structure. I was taught about conflict in a scene. I
From
was
watching?
taught about reiterating the franchise in each scene. I had very, very good mentors who guided me. And I also learned from reading books. You learn a lot from good books. You learn even more from bad ones.
Mhm.
When I was younger, even now, when I read a book and it makes me scared, or it makes me sad, or it makes me laugh, or it turns me on, or whatever, I go back and I study. How did the author make me afraid with just words? How did the author make me laugh? How did the author, arouse me? Whatever. I want to know how the author did it. Or why do I not care? Why do I want to throw this book? That's my elbow thing. Why do I want to throw this book away? How did the author fail me? How did they lose me? What's wrong with this story that I'm not engaged? So, unlike my younger self, if I'm reading a book and I don't like it, I don't finish it. I toss it. Used to be I
Exactly.
finished every
I
book
do
I
that- I
read,
do
but
that
not
too.
anymore.
Yeah.
But now, even now, when I'm reading a book and I give up on it, I do ask myself, wait a minute, this book has won all these awards or all this praise. Why is it not connecting with me? What is my problem with it? And how can I avoid this happening to me as a writer?
What do you find is the most common reason in those books that I can't go on? I do that too. I used to read everything completed because I started it. By God, I'm going to finish it. I don't do that anymore. I'm too old. But
I think
but
there are not enough emotional stakes for the reader to invest in the character, or they're ridiculous stakes. They're not real stakes. They're manufactured. I cannot stand exposition dumps. I can't stand it when a writer tells me what to feel and tells me what I should know about a character instead of letting me discover it for myself. I mean, there's some things you have to be told, but when a writer just lays it on, and then starts giving me all these metaphors and shines a light on what the theme of the book is, and hammers the significant moments or the key symbols. It's just, geez, stop it. Give me some credit for having a brain. Let me come to my own conclusions about whether someone's bad or good. Don't tell me this is a bad guy. Don't tell me this guy's cunning and clever and brilliant, and the first thing he says is something bland. I and also have a plot that engages me and surprises me. I can't. Maybe it's because I've written so many mysteries. If a book is fairly plotted, where the clues are there to be seen, I usually can see them. But if it's done well, I just feel smart, and I admire the author for I feel good. But if it's clumsy and obvious, I hate the author. It's like, Jesus, why don't you just point arrows and a spotlight and have everyone announce that that's the clue that's going to solve the crime,
right.
or this is what's going to happen? I also, the other thing I don't like is when I'm aware that when I'm reading that the writer is making it up as he goes along, or she's making it up as she goes along. You can tell they're typing, oh, I just found the story, and they move that direction. Don't cut the shit where they were treading narrative water. I hate that. Plot the book, know where you're going. Or if you don't do that, go back and cut all the false turns and all the treading water. I don't like it. I think it disrespects the reader. I mean, I know people are seat of the pantsers. That's fine, but I shouldn't be able to see it.
Right.
So I have a question for you. If you were now starting out and knowing what you know now, but you're looking at the young Lee, just starting out as a writer, professional writer, what advice would you give him?
Relax, it'll happen. Don't try so hard. I mean, it's funny because my ambition and my drive got me where I am. I mean, the advice I give to writers is, people will look at my career and they say, oh, Lee, you were so lucky. No, I was not lucky. I put myself in a position for the luck to happen. I surrounded myself with people who had the same interests as me. So, a lot of the people I was friends with in college are now major talents in television and film and publishing, because we all hung out together and had the same interests and stayed in touch. Um, I got my big break through what some people would say was luck, and I would say was hard work. I got my big break because when I was younger, as I said, I was writing those things for my mom, but I also was writing for the local newspaper and working for my school newspaper and doing interviews with big Hollywood celebrities over the phone for my local newspaper. And then I came to UCLA and I went to work on the Daily Bruin, in addition to continuing to write articles for major magazines to support myself, to pay my tuition and my rent. And I became good friends with my journalism advisor, who was writing these big, bulky conspiracy thrillers like Robert Ludlum used to write. And he would show me his manuscripts and I would give him advice on plotting and sex, even though I had no experience plotting and no experience with sex, but I was, an expert on everything. And one day his publisher came to him and asked him if he would write a men's action adventure series, which they don't exist anymore. But back in the day, they were everywhere. The Executioner, the Destroyer, the Immolator, the Defecator, the Drooler. They all had ER, OR at the end, and some guy with washboard abs and a big gun and women with giant breasts in the background on the cover. And they were in finer 7-Elevens and Safeways and gas stations around the country. His publisher asked him if he'd write one. He said, "No, I'm not hungry enough, stupid enough, or desperate enough to write one of these, but I know somebody who is." And he recommended me. And I was 18 years old. And I wrote 357 Vigilante by Ian Ludlow. So I'd be on the shelf next to Robert Ludlum.
Ludlum.
And Ian for Ian Fleming. So people would go, "Ian Ludlow. You think I read? I think I read something by him." By the way, behind me, you can see one of the painted covers from the Vigilante novels.
Yeah.
All they did was change the part at the bottom to reflect whatever was happening in the novel. My book came out the same week this guy Bernard Goetz blew away some muggers on a New York subway train. Vigilantes were hot. Newer Pictures bought the movie rights, hired me to write the script. I was still in college.
Wow.
So I became a published author and a screenwriter while I was still in college. And people would say, "Oh, Lee, you were lucky." No, I put myself there. I surrounded myself with people that could give me those opportunities. And then it all fell apart. The movie didn't get made. Pinnacle went out of business. I never got any money for the books. I was back to being a journalist again. And so my writing partner and I didn't know about scripts when I was in college, and I had a friend who was in the UCLA screenwriting department. He and I wrote the Vigilante script together. He and I wrote a spec episode of Spencer for Hire. And there was a aspiring agent at William Morris. She was a secretary for a bigger agent. And she saw our spec, Spencer for Hire. It's a long story. It was with our literary agent, happened to end up on her desk. And she sent it to Spencer, which is the dumbest freaking thing you could do. You never send a spec episode of the show you spec, because all they will see are the mistakes you've made. But she didn't know any better. She wasn't a real agent. She was a secretary. Anyway, she sent this to Spencer at a time when they didn't have any scripts. And our spec came in. They loved it. They bought it. They shot it and hired us to write 4 more episodes.
Wow.
That's how my TV career began. And that's how that secretary became an agent. And then later a big manager. And I mean, so our careers all start at the same time. But again, put yourself in the situation for the luck to happen. I remember I was at maybe you were there, Doug. I can't remember. It was a conference. It was Sleuth Fest or something in Florida. And there's this woman who stood up and said, I have a question for you. I've written 5 novels and I can't seem to get them published. And I said, "Well, what have you done with them?" "Nothing." "What do you mean nothing?" "Well, I've written them. And?" "Well, I don't know what to do." "What do you think was going to happen? That one day somebody from Penguin Putnam was going to knock on your door and say, 'Excuse me, ma'am, I'm in the neighborhood knocking on doors looking for novels. Do you happen to have 5 or 6 of them?' 'Yes, I do.' You got to send them out there. You got to, at least you're here at this conference. That's a start. You're meeting
Right.
people, you're asking questions. But I tell young writers now, go to these writers' conferences. Join the screenwriting group at your Barnes & Noble or the writers group at Barnes & Noble, because you never know who in that group is going to make it and be your contact in the industry. I'll give you another example. When I was running a show called Missing for Lifetime, there was a woman who sent in a spec episode of 6 Feet Under as her writing sample. And I really liked it. And I brought her in and she pitched some ideas for our show that weren't right, but I liked the way she thought and I liked her voice. And ordinarily what you would do in a situation like that is give them a freelance script to prove themselves. But No, I hired her as a staff writer. Well, she was part of a screenwriting group at a Barnes and Noble in Santa Monica. Suddenly, all these people in that group had a friend in the television business who could report back to them and tell them what was working and not working in television, who the agents were, the mistakes she was seeing being made, and the stuff that was working. And they all learned from that. And everybody in her group became television writers because they became their own inside network. So she, by virtue of being on our show, was dealing with, saw the agents that we were dealing with and met other writers and learned about opportunities about agents who are looking for stuff or other shows where there was an opportunity for a freelance script. Because, when you're on a show, you interact with directors and writers who are working on other shows. So you learn all about what's going on all over the rest of the television industry at the time. You have your finger on the pulse of everything that's going on. So she was able to tell her friends about things, and that's how you do it. You make your own luck happen. You don't wait for opportunities to just land in your lap or knock on your door. You have to work at them.
And you definitely, obviously from a very young age, you were working very hard. You were juggling a lot of things to get where you've gotten today. You didn't just, show up and meet somebody. And it's too many times I think that new writers think all they need is that one audition, and they don't realize how much work it goes into becoming an overnight success, which doesn't.
You also don't want to be that person who is mercenary in their friendships. I befriended that professor, honestly. I wasn't looking for a job. I was interested in writing. I wanted to learn from him. When I make friends, people have always asked me, my God, the blurbs you get on your books are amazing. How do you get Jeffrey Deaver and Mark Graney and Ace Atkins and Lee Child and all these big name authors to blurb your books? I said, well, they're friends of mine. How did they become friends of yours? I'd see them on the book trail. I'd see them at conferences, and I wasn't hitting them up for stuff. We talk about writing. We talk about our families. We talk about things anybody talks about. They became friends, not people I intended to use.
Right.
Michael Connolly was a friend of mine has been a friend of mine for 30 some years, but I never went to him for a blurb before Lost Hills. And even then I felt uncomfortable doing it because I didn't want to impose on our friendship. That's what you do. You surround yourself with people, and you meet people, and you help each other because you're friends, or you admire each other, or you have friends who can introduce you to other people. Like if there was an author I really wanted to get my book to and didn't know, I would probably have a friend who knew that author.
Right.
We could meet and introduce each other, or at least get my book to them. So that it's like any business, it's a business of relationships. Writing is not just an art, it's a business, and you have to create connections in the business. Absolutely. I have worked for a ton of publishers. You will not find a single publisher who won't work with me again. I have never burned a bridge.
That's fantastic.
The other thing.
Yeah.
It's important if you leave a publisher to leave on good terms and not badmouth the previous publisher you were with.
Lee, this has been fantastic. You are a wonderful interview. We're going to have you back because I think we could do this for several hours, which might get a little long.
Yeah, exactly. We could. I
know. You're just fantastic. Lee Goldberg, thank you so much for being with us. Really appreciate it. And, I look forward to reading all your work, and you just always surprise. So thank you so much. I'm going to ask our viewers to please click that like button, which is a little thumbs up, and subscribe so we can bring more of these interviews to you. And we will be back soon. And this has been Lee Goldberg. Thanks again, Lee.
Thanks, Lee. Greatly appreciated.